What was the final straw that made you quit a job? After years of no raises due to budget constraints, I learned that a newly hired coworker was making like 30% more than me. Didn't help that he absolutely sucked. Story 2. I was told I should have managed my time off better. My mom was found passed in her apartment. The coroner couldn't even guess the day she died. I had to clean her apartment, go to court hearings of her behalf, and was relentlessly harassed by another family that thought she had any kind of money, and I had to go to the police. I took 4 days off. I needed to get out of work like 2 hours early to pick up her ashes and got hit with that. I was hired at a different company the next day. I came in to have lunch with my coworkers and clean out my things and just left. Management or HR never bothered to call me. They knew. Story 3. My last job, I was warehouse manager, installer, and delivery for heavy arcade equipment over 3 years. They had a high turnover rate, but my boss was cool. Later on, I found out why the turnover rate was high. The company owner was a massive prick. The day I quit, I was going through a heavy depression, but still showed up to work because I did enjoy the work. I showed up at 6:50 a.m., clock in is at 7 a.m., used the bathroom, I come out and the owner was outside waiting for me to come out. No good morning, no how are you, nothing. Just, clock and time is at 7, right? I look at the clock and it's 6:58. I looked at him and say, good morning, and walk to the punch, ignoring his comment. I start my workday and look at the sheet for what I have for the day. It's a packed day from start to finish. About 30 minutes into the shift, I just lost all drive. Again, depression is a bit. My mind kept racing about everything I had to do, and then some. My heart started pounding. I was short on breath and started to feel like I wanted to barf. I called my boss and explained the situation and asked if I could go home, and he told me yes. Have a good day, and I hope you feel better. Call me if you want to talk. I didn't even pack my personal tools. I just clocked out, got in my truck, and started crying completely on edge. Sat there for 20-ish minutes. The owner comes out with a pissed off face asking why I'm not working, getting ready for the day. I told him I was having a bad morning and I needed to leave. I had already confirmed with B that it was okay to take the day. The owner then says, no, you already clocked in, you have to finish your shift. I'm usually a cool, calm, and relaxed person at work. But as soon as he said that, I completely lost it. I got out of the truck and the first things out of my mouth before I could even think were, I don't have to do a fuck thing. If I said I'm having a bad morning, I'm having a bad morning. You seem to forget I'm here because I choose to be here. You don't pay me anywhere near enough for the amount of responsibility and work that I do. He stared at me with a WTF just happened expression. Then, following what I said before he even got a word in, I blurted out, you know what, if I can't leave, then I quit plain and simple. Find someone else that can do everything I do and isn't going to complain or steal from you. Got back in my truck and left. Skipped out on a week and a half of work. Never even left the house. Then my boss calls me asking if I'm okay and that he saw what happened on the camera in front of the building and apologized for it on behalf of the owner. Asked me to come back and all. I said I'd come back under the conditions that I get a raise and a helper. He said, yes, we can talk about it here. I show up the next day, everything is cool. Then the owner shows up talking about how it was extremely disrespectful the way I spoke to him, blah, blah, blah. I looked at B and said, you know what, man, I'm good. I'm just gonna look for something else. 3 days later, I was at a company across the street and getting paid almost twice what I was making with them with none of the responsibility or problem. I'm still friends with B. Last we spoke, he said they had to hire 3 people to do what I was doing. All the owner had to do was agree to what I was asking for in some respect. He would have saved a shit ton more money than hiring 3 people. This was the first time in my life I experienced angry depression with a panic attack alongside it that turned into more f*** you anger. Story 4. My boss getting mad at me over the dumbest thing ever. I actually already quit that job after 2 years of working there and was gone for a month and a half. But my boss asked me to come back for another 3 months because he couldn't find another employee to replace me. I agreed because I hadn't yet found a new job. It had been about a month that I was back, and there was another guy who had worked there for around 2-ish months at that point, so he wasn't yet familiar with all the things he had to do. On the day that I quit again, and for good, I wanted to show him how to pay bills at the financial agency across the street. Sounds like a silly thing to show him, but there was a catch he wasn't aware of. My boss told me that I have to wait for him to come back. He went to pick up some parts. It was a phone store or repair shop, but he didn't tell me when he would be back. It was around 10:15 a.m. when he left, and the bill had to be paid until 12 a.m. at the latest. I didn't know when he would be back, so I was a bit anxious. Around 11 a.m., I saw that the financial agency was empty, so I told my colleague that we should go now so that we don't miss our chance to pay it. There was also no one in the store, so we were able to lock it. For those 3 or 4 minutes, it took us to go across the street and pay the bill. I locked the store and went out all the time because there was no toilet there, so I had to go across the street, either to the agency or a cafe bar, so it's not like that was the first time I did that. We paid the bill and came back just a few moments after we entered the store. Our boss came back as well, and he went berserk. because I didn't listen to him. That was fair, and I tried to explain to him why. We went so that we don't miss the chance to pay, and didn't want to call him because he was driving his scooter that day and didn't pick up phone calls while he was on it. So I didn't know when he would be back, and no customers came in those 4 minutes that we were away. The view from the agency is directly at the store, so I kept a lookout. He did not want to hear any of it. He just kept yelling at me, so I lost my cool and started arguing with him as well. He stormed out, and I stayed there for another 20-ish minutes, contemplating what I should do. I decided to just leave the keys and go. My colleague agreed it was the best thing to do. I came back to the store a few days later to sign my resignation notice. My boss wasn't there. I still come to that store once or twice a year. My ex-boss still has some resentment towards me, but we can talk normally. It is worthy of mentioning, though, that at this time, early in mid-2021, I was mentally in the dumps, and my boss and I had fought for months prior due to some major changes at the store I wasn't happy with. Singing a contract for a bigger company to sell their products, so I basically worked for them and my boss, but the pay was the same, and I truly disliked selling their products contracts. And also, my boss and I always had a friendly relationship. So we talked about personal stuff too, and he wasn't happy about some of the things I've done with certain people, so that caused additional strain between us. Overall, it was a mess, and I deeply regret how it all went down. I miss that job every single day, to be honest. Story 5. I was a part-time stalker at a Sherwin-Williams. I made it very clear to my manager that this was my part-time gig for side money. I had my full-time job where I paid my bills, and everything from Sherwin was just for hobbies. He was super cool and understood the situation. I show up, stock the shelves, and take care of the warehouse, then help customers with paint if needed. 14 hours a week, no problem. Easy money. My manager got promoted to regional sales manager, and our store got a new manager. We'll call her Jessica. She came from a different store, and it was her first time managing. She was kind of all right, but also pretty annoying and would micromanage. Shortly after her joining, I moved apartments from 5 minutes away to about 45 away to be closer to my full-time job. The upside to this was I could stop by Sherwin's on the way and get supplies if my store needed something. Anyways, in my time there, I had some paint spill on my shoe. Nothing much, just a little white paint on the side of my black shoes. Jessica decided to change the dress policy one of the days I wasn't there. And really, the only thing that changed was that you have to have all black shoes. This was never communicated to the team by anything other than the people there that day getting told. I show up to work after stopping by a couple of stores on the way to pick up material. Jessica is late ASF like usual, so I take care of the store with the assistant manager. She never mentioned the dress code change to me, so I still have no idea that there's been any changes. I'm working taking care of some customers, and Jessica comes up to me, interrupts my conversation with the customer just to berate me about having white paint on my shoes. Again, this is a drip of paint, maybe 2 inches long at most, on the side of my shoe. She yells at me to go home and change my shoes. I'm confused by this, and the customer is looking at me like WTF is going on. I ask Jessica if she's kidding because, again, I have no idea there's been a dress code change. She tells me to go home right now and change my shoe. I double check with her that she wants me to drive 45 minutes home, change shoes, and drive 45 minutes back with a decently busy store that's short-staffed. She said, yeah, leave now, bye. I head home, and as I'm sitting in traffic, I'm stewing. I'm annoyed and angry about this. It's a waste of my time. I called my dad to chat with him while I'm waiting, and he's appalled by it. After about 15 minutes of driving and chatting, I've made up my mind. I turn around and head back to the store. I get there and head straight into the back, grab my speaker and charger for my cubby, head into the office and erase my name off the board, scribble out my contact info on the sheet, and walk out. There's a huge line of people waiting to be helped, and Jessica's trying to take care of one of them. I butt into her conversation and give her "It was nice working here. Bye," then walk out. As I'm about to get into my truck, Jessica runs out and asks where I'm going. Home, you were disrespectful AF and an ass. Good luck, I'm out, and drove off. The best part was all of this was like 8 years ago, and I only just got my last check about a month ago. Story 6. I worked for an attorney's office. It was only 2 partners and 1 associate working, so not very big. I had previously worked with the one partner when he was in government. Anyway, the beginning of the job went well, everyone got along. We all would share laughs, but when we hired the associate, things just took a turn. His demeanor, he would scream at me for no reason. Once he started making money, he became a different person. He wanted me to reach out to clients and demand they pay their invoice in full when they were at the lowest point of their life, whether it was a divorce or criminal matter. I refused to do that and offered to put them on a payment plan, which he later became okay with after I explained to him the circumstances of some of the clients. When COVID hit, he didn't believe it was real. He was like, it's a common cold, etc. I remember I caught it and I was scared shitless that I was going to die, and he poked fun at me and told me not to worry. I remember the exact day that I got sick, and it was January 6th. the day of the insurrection on the Capitol. There were times when mistakes were made on pleadings that he filed himself, not me, and then would scream from the second floor for me to come up to his office, not use the phone, but scream my name. I would go up there and be like, "What is up?" and he would just be stomping his feet at me. One time he punched a wall and pushed all the stuff off his desk, which he then demanded I pick up. Oh, and he wasn't a cleanly person, especially when his kids were there. Oh my. I was the housekeeper that had to clean up after them and empty the garbage with them in the room. It was humiliating. Other instances where the two partners would make fun of me constantly, poking fun at some of the clothing or shoes that I wore to the car I was driving. My husband bought a sports car and I drove it one time, and they made such fun of me for having it, like telling me, "Oh, you don't need that," etc. That was the last time I drove it there. When I was buying a new house, I refused to use their title service. They never let me live that down and they were angry at me for it, saying you didn't need to buy a new house, your new house was just fine, or you ripped the person off selling it to you demanding a lesser deal. Mind you, the house we bought had a lot of issues with it due to neglect. We have fixed most of them. Other instances were when it was bad weather. I remember one time there was an ice storm and I refused to drive an hour to that office, and he screamed at me over the phone demanding that I come into the office and saying the roads were fine where he was. I was in a completely different county, Pennsylvania, than he was. I remember sobbing to my husband that I was afraid to drive, and I also let the boss know that as well. I finally found a new job and got the hell out of there. Before I was just depressed and didn't do anything that I once loved doing because I was run so ragged. Now I'm baking and keeping things in order at my house because I now work from home, which is great. I love my new job and wouldn't trade it for anything else. Story 7. I was the de facto manager at a hobby store back in 2001. The owner had chased everyone else off. I was doing all the manager duties at the pay of a regular store associate. One day I come in and one of our regular customers is behind the counter. I ask him what's going on and he says he's the new manager. I went with it for a few months. Turns out the guy was a snake. He tried to lock me in the bathroom so I'd clean it. Next day when the owner was there doing orders, I threw my key at him, told him to go f himself and left. I walked to the other end of the strip mall and was promptly hired at mailboxes, etc. Story 8. I actually worked a pretty sweet gig as a night shift receptionist at a hotel. I worked with a guy around my age, and when it was slow, we could watch movies, game, and even go to the hotel gym while the other watched the desk. Plus, night shift gets paid a lot more by law where I'm from. There was a problem, however. The hotel manager was like a classic stereotypical 1960s bad boss, but gay. He'd come up behind the boys and overbearingly use their mouse on their computer. He would just start stroking their hair. And he would always show the girls some weird idiot soft he-day website and talking like, isn't this one nice? While they're just saying you know after you know as he's laughing. Now, I rarely met him because I was night shift, so in my day-to-day, his behavior didn't affect me, but obviously this was a problem. So eventually, the reception had a senior staff member talk to the owner about this. And the response? Have the manager hire another manager who's his friend to be reception manager as a filter between reception and the hotel manager. Okay. There is at least talk that the hotel manager will have his office somewhere else, which never happens, but his behavior did change. The new manager then sends an email saying she'd like to meet each shift and schedules a time a couple of weeks later. Me and my colleague use the time to think of ways to improve the hotel, and when the shift meeting arrives, it is revealed to be individual. And my night shift colleague, who had worked there much longer than me, gets fired, and I'm informed that from now on I'll be working nights alone. Now, I had gotten quite close to my colleague. In fact, I'm going to his wedding in just a couple weeks. Plus, he had worked there longer and he did most of the tedious work like allocating rooms or doing the books, which he preferred because I would handle the guests, which I preferred. So basically, in my eyes, I would more than double my workload while making it impossible to do all the fun stuff I could do at work with a partner. And they fired my friend who loved his job, was definitely better at it than me, wanted to make the hotel better. And the only reason I could possibly think why they fired him and not me was because he got paid around 200 USD more than me a month. I was making around 4,700 USD in a month after tax, which is minimum wage for night shift reception in my country. I left the meeting and sat at my desk for about 5 minutes, still in shock. They want to have 2 managers for 6 receptionists. I stuck my head in the manager's office door and told them I quit. I'm done. This is my final day. The look of shock was incredibly satisfying. The other night shift also got halved, and the one that wasn't fired immediately asked to be switched to day shift. From what I heard, the night shift was a complete shit show for months. Every other receptionist eventually ended up quitting. Both managers were fired, resigned within the year. Story 9. I was working as an IC for 5 years with the same company. I handled multiple clients at any given moment and was the longest employee my boss had. There had never been an issue. I had never considered leaving the position as it was work from home, allowed me a little more control over my schedule, and paid decently. Fast forward to September of last year, my biggest client, who took up literally a third of my income, decided they wanted a different contractor because of one spelling error on an internal memo, despite knowing that I'm dyslexic. As an IC, I have no protections. I figured things would suck for a month, that I would have to pinch pennies, but my supervisor would hand me a client soon as she claimed that she had a backlog of clients that she needed to pair with someone. It never happened. Instead, I was told that she couldn't trust me to do my job, that maybe the way her company does the job isn't for me, and a bunch of other things that made absolutely no sense. This is a virtual assistant company. I've been an executive assistant for more than a decade. It's something I'm extremely good at. After that meeting, I started looking elsewhere. It took me until February of this year, but I'm now in a job that I absolutely love and thrive in, even if I'm not working from home anymore. Definitely made the right decision because my ex-supervisor tried to gaslight me into staying when I gave her a week's notice. My contract that I had signed 5 years prior, that had a rollover clause, had a mandatory 1-week notice. Those who had signed on in the past year had a mandatory 2-week notice with a recommendation of 30 days. Needless to say, I told her that her lack of planning was not my problem and that maybe she should think twice about punishing her hardest workers by threatening their livelihood. Story 10. Worked in a factory a few years ago. Pay was decent, but the guy who operated the indoor crane was an alcoholic. The moron almost hit my head. A colleague who saw it told me he was amazed that he didn't hit me. Moron wasn't even reprimanded. I got a job at another factory a few miles away just 2 days later. They had heard of the abysmal reputation of that place as they had already hired 4 people from there before me. Story 11. This will sound bad for me, but I waited a year for them to sign documents finalizing my partnership agreement. They also had not paid me back thousands in expenses for nearly 2 years. The final straw was that they now decided that I would have to fly to New York and meet clients every month. They told me this meant wearing suits and spending a week in their office for FaceTime. To me, that meant more expenses unpaid and time away with zero additional benefit to me. Backstory: small consulting company. Small. I was promoted to director and given a raise. My job became doing everything in my old position, plus all the hiring and people management for basically the entire company's product, software development consulting. The next year, they offered me a partnership with a small raise. This included 10% profit sharing. I knew there were no profits and the company was just barely getting by. That's what happens when you are still paying your old, disgruntled partners and paying back money you stole from the government. They took out the COVID EIDL loan like everyone else did and lied and told me it was forgiven. I decided foolishly to accept, and it took months for a contract to be signed. In that time, my shares went from 10% ownership to 5%. They decided I didn't do enough, and they converted some back pay they owed me into a bonus. I also had zero voting rights with this agreement, as they decided to invent junior partner just for me. The owners didn't like giving away voting rights for free. I knew this was the best I was going to get if I wanted to stay, and I just didn't have the motivation at the time to start a job hunt. So I worked on 60 to 70-hour work weeks. I become more involved in the sales cycle. People tend to like me, and having someone smart and knows what they're talking about on sales calls. They liked me, and they signed contracts to work with me and the teams I put together. The other partners, who were still my boss since I'm a junior, decided I would fly out much more frequently. I was brought up that I would need to be reimbursed for this travel, and I was very frustrated that I had been added the responsibility of sales on top of engineering manager, project manager, coder, recruiter, HR, and IT manager. What the heck were the other partners even doing? So I brought up all of this and was told that I don't understand how businesses work and that things would get better, that they would eventually reimburse me. Well, I refused to fly anymore, and I started looking for new work. When I left, everything imploded within a few months. Every contract that I helped land, they had been fired from. It was very sad because many of my coworkers were laid off and I really cared about their success. Story 12. Boss said, "We expect you to go above and beyond without extra pay, extra respect, or even extra coffee." I went above and beyond straight out the door. Story 13. I worked at a studio filming company as an account manager. Owner didn't trust anybody and stacked people in rooms divided by floor-to-ceiling sound barriers. Each room was surrounded entirely by glass and cameras pointed to every cubby so the owner could ensure we weren't wasting her time by doing personal stuff. We had a large meeting in a room one time, and a client was looking to load a paid programming on a holiday weekend and felt like the Christmas weekend was the best time to do it. I had taken statistics classes for marketing and had dug into consumer responses based on holiday atmosphere and knew promoting a class on providing outstanding service was the last thing anybody would want to buy on a Christmas holiday weekend. You're either with family, or you're already lonesome and don't need to have it further emphasized with paid programming. So I piped up and suggested a better holiday weekend would be the New Year's Eve weekend. The owner gave me a stern look, but I didn't back down. I quoted statistical data and explained the research behind the study. He was very interested and, in fact, asked that I manage his program on that weekend. The owner was furious with me and told me I was off the account. Then she told him that my data was incorrect and that the Christmas holiday was the best for the release. He was skeptical, but took her lengthier experience and ran with it. He paid triple time, weekend and holiday, to have 4 account managers sit there and do nothing for 8 hours while the owner monitored the videos and made sure they didn't make any personal calls. Not one single unit sold. Client asked for a refund and asked that I be put back on his account. Owner refused, but did allow him to have New Year's weekend for 1/3 of the price. He sold out in 2 hours. Did I get praised? Nope. I got moved to the corner cubby, visible on both sides instead of just one, and was told all my emails to clients would be scanned for content by the 2 adjacent cubby residents. When I came to work and saw I had been moved, I walked to the owner's office and told her that part of being a successful manager was understanding the strengths and weaknesses of her staff. I also told her I couldn't work for someone who would never trust her staff to do what was best for her company. I walked off the job. The business went belly up 2 years later. The guy who was supposed to scan my email figured out how to steal dividends and bilked her for over $2 million. She had to reimburse the client for the losses and was too stupid to buy business insurance and cover theft. Story 14. The job I quit like this was actually a slow buildup of about 2 years, which is a freaking long time to try to make things work. I was a staff accountant at a housing nonprofit, absolutely loved the job. My boss was a piece of shit with narcissistic tendencies. He was a workaholic and thought the place had to run like public accounting, crazy work hours and no time off. I was supposed to be the supervisor of the accounting specialist, but I could never keep straight what he wanted in the department, and he wouldn't follow through with passing tasks down, which is why he hired me, to help him get stuff off his plate so he could do CFO tasks. I hit my breaking point 2 years in when he just wouldn't do what he said he'd do. The whole time he's like, I can't do this without you, I trust you, but he won't give me simple grant spreadsheets. He just is a control freak. So I go to the ED and HR and I'm like, I'm gonna walk, this is stupid. They convinced me to stay with promises of becoming controller and gave me a timeline. I'm like, okay, I will try some more. Same stuff happens, he won't give things over. My ed tells me one thing she wants me to do. He says the opposite. He criticizes my work like, I can't make any mistake ever. Just the same bull. I had started therapy maybe around the 3rd year of being there, and all I knew was I was miserable. My therapist helped me see what was going on and gave me the courage to leave. The last straw was when I had to call out for a migraine. I get them pretty often, and if you know, you know. He lays into me because it happened on the last day of the month. He said he almost had a panic attack because it was the last day. Dude, it's Feb. It's not the end of the fiscal year. It's not Jan. And there are not a lot of tasks for the month end. I immediately started looking for jobs, and it took me a while to find one, but I finally left. They were terrible to me the last few weeks. My ed would come to my door and just sigh, saying she was disappointed. She essentially told me that she would keep him above anyone else there. I wanted to scream at them. He drove away at least 4 people in the 4 years I was there, and another 2 people after I had left. I'm appalled at what I put up with there. Story 15. My new district manager insulted my bullet journal. It seems petty, but it was literally the straw that broke the camel's back. I began managing a small pet store at the beginning of COVID. I worked my butt off to make sure my team stayed safe. Only 3 out of 12 staff members caught COVID during the entire pandemic. I doubled store profit, and my team won several awards each year. We did all that while operating in an unsafe neighborhood and constantly getting our hours cut. During my last year, my hours were cut so badly that I could only schedule 1 team member per shift. I had to schedule creatively so that people could get lunch breaks, but that means people had to open, close alone, and could not take bathroom breaks. I told them to lock up and go to the bathroom anyway. There was a glitch that doubled inventory whenever we scanned it and leading to inaccurate inventory counts. There was another glitch that created an additional register if the internet crashed during the day, which led to a huge cash shortage at night and a cash overage of the same amount on the next night. I documented and reported issues. I advocated for better hours. I was punished when there were cash/inventory problems, despite the reported glitches. I was punished if a customer complained about lack of service, despite the lack of staff. Finally, my quarterly bonus was changed to a yearly bonus that could only be received if you worked 12 to 12 months each year. I finally decided to apply elsewhere and received a few offers. While debating whether to entertain the offers, my new district manager visited my store. I was ready to talk about the condition of the store and ask for support. I wasn't too proud to ask for help. Immediately, he began shitting on everything. Every other word out of his mouth was an insult. The old district manager, he was touring with him, had to pull him to the side and ask him to take it easy. He didn't take it easy and finally ended in the office where I kept my notes. He picked up my bullet journal and began micromanaging how I organized my daily tasks. That day, I had a simple bullet list of to-do items and a small handful of reminders at the bottom of the page. Nothing fancy and easy to follow. I didn't have time that day to make anything more elaborate. I decided to say fuck it and responded to a few of the job offers. I had a new job lined up in less than a week. Story 16. Had an it problem crop up that took out email. I was the fill-in it person, the only it person. The regular it guy was away, and somewhere at the time, uncontactable boss hounded me for hours until the issue was fixed. It was an issue that shouldn't have been able to happen, but we were using such ancient versions of the AV&M's exchange that it did. For those wondering, the AV took out the mail store. We were the biggest sellers of both products. New versions would have cost us nothing. A week later, I was called into the owner's office and he had a go at me for letting my sales figures drop for the month. The month I was also doing all the it. I knew where he heading, so I pointed out all the faults in the company and how they all led back to him and his lack of leadership. Silly man had left his office door open, so everyone heard every word I said. I then clearly articulated exactly what he could do with his job. Spoke to the payroll person on the way out, had every cent I was entitled to be the close of business that day, cost the business a $15K deal on software sales, the IT guy, quit the next day in solidarity, and 2 other salespeople found the door. Story 17. Year was 1999-2000, and I was 20 years old. I was on a crew of about 8 to 10 people installing underground fiber optic lines, primarily around the Denver metro area. We typically worked 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Since most of us lived in a different city, we got hotel accommodations and $30 day per diem. I was dating the boss's daughter at the time, which he had no problem with initially because I'd grown up a member of the same church. I was also a crew lead with an impeccable attendance and performance record. However, he caught wind of the fact that my coworkers and I were spending copious amounts of money on Jägermeister, substances, and various club substances on our spare time. He apparently was not jiving on that because he took all of our per diem down to the minimum of $15 per day, and instead of a full check up front for the week, it was a daily allowance. Understandable, I guess, but then he did something totally underhanded. Without warning one day, he hires this other dude and invited me to drive around with them scouting out the new job locations for the upcoming week. I had no idea who this guy was, but instead of scouting out jobs, we scouted out used truck lots. After 5 hours of truck shopping, ass-kissing from the new guy, and openly discussing this new salary, higher than mine, and new job title of foreman, higher ranking than me, he picks out a 2-year-old F-250, pays cash for it, and gives the keys to the new guy as a signing bonus. Then gave me a wink and said something shitty like, "You do the right things, you get treated the right way." I got back to my room that night, got incredibly plastered on Jaeger, and marched right up to his room and spat my resignation in his face, including breaking up with his daughter to him. Kind of forgot I was 200 miles from home, so in the middle of the night, I called my mom and she drove over the mountain to retrieve me and my suitcase. When I came to the next day at my parents' house, I was mortified to realize that I had just quit in that fashion. Oops. Story 18. I once quit a job with no notice in the middle of the day. My boss was this short, angry woman that would get pissed over the smallest mistakes. The job also involved remembering a million tiny convoluted details, many of which she explained poorly or had no explanation other than, "That's how we do it." The crappy quality training combined with me really not being well suited for the job frustrated me and infuriated her. One day, she went off on me so loudly that the guy down the hall had to apologize to the customer he was in the phone with because they could hear the yelling. I'd been contemplating going back to school and pursuing a different career path, but that job definitely wouldn't have worked with going to school. The job I had quit before that, however, would have, and I left there on good terms. So, the day after the yelling incident, after contemplating for half the day, I took my lunch break and called my old boss to ask if they would hire me back. His response was, "When can you start?" And I told him I'd let him know. After lunch, I went back into the office and asked to speak to her a moment. I told her the way she spoke to me was rude and unprofessional, and that while I had made a mistake, it didn't warrant the kind of verbal abuse she was dishing out. What she didn't realize was that apologizing was her opportunity to get 2 weeks' notice from me. She instead flew off the handle again. So without a word, I walked away, shook hands with my other 2 coworkers, and walked to her boss's office to explain to him why I was leaving. I was at least the 3rd person she'd bullied into quitting, and from what I heard afterwards, she got her ass chewed pretty good over it. The best part is, my old job worked with my school schedule. I got my associate's degree in a little over a year, transferred credits from a previous stint in college, and 7 years or so later, I make well over 3 times what that stupid job paid. If you're reading this, fuck you, Stephanie. I hope your poor husband got tired of your bitch. and left you for something closer to his own size. Story 19. I ended up having a meltdown after being 5 minutes late. Not because I got told off or yelled at. I literally had run down and couldn't breathe properly. It was why I was late. I got new shoes and I had to get the shoelaces, even so I could wear them. And I took too long doing that. I don't think it was about the shoelaces though. The job itself was exhausting. I was only supposed to be doing 2-hour shifts 4 times a week. That's what it said in my contract. But when I was employed, they gave me a sheet for filling out my free time with an odd way of putting things that were easily interpreted as fill this out so we know when you're available to do your 2-hour shifts. Turns out that wasn't it at all. I ended up doing 3 8-hour shifts and 1 2-hour shifts a week, which was exhausting while also being a full-time college student. The pay was weird too. When I applied, I was told I'd be making $12 an hour, but when I was actually employed, I was informed for the first 3 months of my employment, I would only be getting about $10, and I could be fired just like that. And instead of having an employee discount of 20%, it was closer to 10. And I wasn't informed that I had 2 15-minute breaks on my 8-hour shift, only 45 minutes for lunch, another employee told me. I hated it. Changing rooms was my favorite. It was just standing for an hour, occasionally scanning a pass to let someone go in and try on clothes, and I didn't have to do anything most of the time. Tills made everything go by quickly, but people were cruel for stupid reasons, and people I knew from high school, bullies, would come in and I'd be terrified they'd come up. But the rest of the time I was organizing and cleaning in this horribly bright, loud environment. I once spent 4 hours folding thongs. Yes, it's possible and it hurts your fingers like hell. If a customer asked me where something was, I would have no clue because I wasn't told. Story 20. The son of the owner told me I wasn't a team player. I started as just a driver. When I left, I was dispatching 8 small trucks at 4 a.m., scheduling big trucks for deliveries, emailing customers on inventory, shippers on overage, and missing product. 8 a.m. I do delivers and pick up in a big truck. Back in the office, cut bills, and get the freight offloaded from the big trucks for the next day to load onto the little trucks. Usually got done around 6, sometimes 8 p.m. I didn't ask for a raise, just overtime and a chance to learn the business. I wanted to grow the company and be a part of it. I always asked questions and helped as much as I could. I never said no to work. When they said it was slow and to go home, I told them I would be in the waiting room if they needed me, and they would need me an hour later. I knew they would need me because I knew the business. It all came to a head during COVID when they wanted me to go to San Francisco. They were working me 10 hours a week. At the time, they wanted to keep costs low, so I worked from home. I had no medical, no life insurance. There was no way I was going to San Francisco when no one knew what the virus was doing, and I didn't have any protection for me or my family, medical, life insurance. I told them I couldn't go. He said, "You can't even be a team player?" Ooh boy. I backed the truck up to the dock. I got my gear and went home. I told him as I was leave, "I'm not a team player, huh?" He said, "That's it for today, thanks." I made $73K there my last year. I started driving for another company and made $89K in 10 months, $3K my first full year. Then I became a mentor, training new guys, $43K. Not a team player, huh? Story 21. Not me, but my brother. Supply chain manager for a small healthcare company. He's great at what he does and has worked his way up from the bottom. The manager responsible for corporate travel left the company and my brother gets asked to take on those duties. A few months later, the manager in charge of production sourcing, which was just a corporate title for a person that buys all of the office furniture, supplies, food, etc., quits. And my brother is asked to also take on that work. He is doing the work of 3 managers and not getting 1 cent more. After 2 months of this, he tells his boss that he needs one of these positions off his plate or to be compensated fairly. He gets told that they are still looking to fill the positions, but should have someone hired soon. He asks for a 10% raise and gets told, "Sorry, no room in the budget right now." He decides to find room in the budget and notices several expensive charter flights taken by the corporate heads. He draws up a proposal to save money using a different service and gets told, "No, and don't ever suggest anything that impacts the bosses again." He puts his resume out there and within 48 hours has 4 different offers for interviews. He tells his boss he's taking 2 weeks off and uses the time to interview and gets offered the job at every interview. The day he comes back, he lets them know of his highest offer, a 5% pay increase with no move required, and only having to do the work of 1 person. His company asks for 24 hours to create a counteroffer. They come back with an offer of a 10% raise, and that he'll be able to offload one of his responsibilities to a new hire coming in a week. He refused it and left at the end of the day for a better life. Story 22. I was working as a software developer for one of the Big 4 consulting firms. I was working on a government project that had initially started out as a fixed-price contract, but somehow the company had convinced the government agency to switch it to a time and materials contract. That basically meant the longer they had people like me working on the project, the more money they got. They had me working 10 days in a row with overtime every single day. And I was getting very close to saying, enough is enough, because I wasn't actually getting paid for those extra hours because it was a salary position. But what actually happened was that one day I had to go home on time because my wife was working that evening and we have children. I told my manager that I had to leave on time, and she looked at me with sheer anger in her eyes and said, "Well, clearly you have a problem that you need to fix. I don't care about what your wife has to do. All I know is that you have to be in this office." I didn't say anything. As soon as she turned her back, I got up and walked over the office. I didn't resign or tell them what my intentions were. I just ghosted them. I decided I'd be taking a few months off to chill for a bit. I do think they realized they made a mistake because they had so many people trying to contact me for several weeks afterwards. About 6 weeks later, I received a letter from the head of HR that had a list of 15 people who had tried to contact me, and they said that because none of them could contact me, they had no choice but to terminate my employment. Story 23. It was Easter Sunday, and I was working at a Borders bookstore. The place was super dead since everyone expected it would be closed. I had finished all my sidelines work, restocking candy and gift cards, tidying up the back area, prepping books to be picked up. Since it was dead, I started reading a book. Mind you, this is the first time I ever read anything on the clock, but there was literally no customers in the store and nothing to do. The manager came up and put the book back, but didn't say anything. I picked it up again, and manager comes back and asks me to go into her office. She claimed that a manager who disliked me had said I was previously reading on the clock before, which I said was a lie. She said she'd watched the camera recordings, so I told her to do it. It'd just be a waste of her time because it never happened. Regardless, she says she's going to write me up for reading on the clock, which is tantamount to stealing from the company. I told her I've never been written up and I wasn't going to start that day, and that I quit. Got to my parents' house just in time for Easter dinner being set down on the table. She said I'd never be able to work for Borders again, which I found very funny because I was already working another full-time job that paid almost twice as much. It got even funnier when Borders permanently went out of business, only a couple years later. Still haven't been written up on the job to this day. Never walked off another job without notice, but have had zero regrets about doing it that time. Story 24. My crazy stalker ex-boyfriend started sending his nonsense to my work email. He had previously tried breaking into my apartment, so I broke a lease and moved, threatened to hit my pets, and showed up at my mom's house to menace her about me. He had guns and knives and really had it out for me. I worked in a public space frequented by families. When I took the emails to my manager and told her I was leaving for the day, I had thrown up and was covered in hives, to talk with the police again, she pulled a face and just said, "Okay, be sure to clock out." When I came back the next day, I overheard her telling another admin staff that she was confident I was faking the whole situation. Never mind, I had the police reports to prove it. Or that I lined up a job interview the next day and quit before the end of the month. They threw me a going away party, and I only showed up for 5 minutes and refused the exit interview. When I handed in my resignation, she made some snide comment about my new job being way more money. I regret not telling her I took an initial 20% pay cut, but the job was in a secured private building with 24-hour security. I'm still with the same company, and I have moved up to make way more money than I ever could have in that previous place. If I ever run into her, though, I'm going to be the biggest bitch. Fuck her. She was a bad boss and a bad person. Story 25. I had been with the company for nearing on 10 years, first job, and had been looking for a new challenge for a while now. 1 year prior, I even had a very open and constructive talk with HR and my manager which direction I wanted to go and how it would fit my personality and capabilities. Had been in account management for 5 years, wanted to move into product management. Then, after years of limited chances, the perfect functions pops up on our company website. I found out by accident, as no internal messages or job postings existed, so I went for it. First talk came through the external contractor that did our recruitment. Couldn't even go for it through internal route. He was going to talk it over with the HR manager, the same one I had the chat with a year prior. Weeks went by. It was summer, so I had time off, but it still felt off. I returned to work and went directly to the hiring manager. He hadn't even received my profile yet. Next interviews were set up. He even contacted my sales director to talk about my profile, and then based on his input, they hired an external person from the director's previous employer because they were actually close to offering her the job when my profile came on the radar. The hiring manager was apologetic because he found my profile interesting and wished my resume had reached him straight away. Our HR manager had shelved my application because from our conversation a year prior, he felt like I wanted to leave the company, handed in resignation the Monday after. Still salty, 5 years later. Story 26. I was a salaried manager at multiple stores for a large pizza chain, working between 60 and 80 hours a week while usually being scheduled 45 and 55. I was making money I didn't think was possible in food service, so I felt like I was obligated to put in as much effort as possible and gave in to every request asked of me. At the end of my time at the company, I'd been transferred to help fix and take over a store about an hour away from me. The store was extremely busy in a college town with a multi-million-dollar contract with the university sports department, so I was literally spending up to 20 hours a day away from home. I'm also diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder, LOL. My final straw was when I was supposed to open my store, but I woke up and started having a panic attack with 4 bouts of projectile vomiting over the course of about an hour. I decided to call my boss and let her know that it probably wasn't a good idea for me to go open the store at this point, to which she replied, after a pause, "Well, I'm not in the area. You'll have to find coverage," and hung up. I felt so fucking disrespected. After literal years of no work-life balance, essentially having to be a de facto HR department therapist to my crew, and dealing with coworkers who had the same position as me, starting drama, and trying to throw people under the bus in the store to make drama. I never found them coverage, and I quit via text a few hours later. Story 27. I worked at Charter back in 2006 in St. Louis. I was hired to do tech support for their newly developing phone service. The hiring manager said that there's light sales, but you only offer as a suggestion and there's no mandatory quota. I took it because I wanted the higher paying job. Didn't sound too bad, even though I'm a tech and not a salesman. While in training, department policy mandates changed right then and there. Forced sales using a sales script. They called it S2s, or service to sales. That was absolutely tone deaf to customers. Management told us, if you didn't sell at least 3 things a day, you were fired. You must stick to the script, no deviation, and make it sound genuine. It's not possible. Whoever wrote the script apparently wasn't fluent in English. So customers started catching on by the second week that everyone was using the same verbiage and forced, which completely erases the ability to be genuine. Even if they were pissed off, didn't have a working phone, told me not to do the sales script, etc., still had to keep doing it. And if the customer yells at you, your quality scores, which are factored into your job performance reviews, suffered with no recourse. Write-ups were happening left and right. People started quitting or getting fired left and right. It was an absolute disaster. The toxicity of the place broke me mentally and physically. Even the thought of having to drive to Charter's Center of Excellence made me ill. I got on at another company and left without notice. I was there 7 months total, Story 28. During a spill and fill restructure, I applied for a role for which there were 2 positions. The only other applicants were 2 people I knew who were woefully unqualified and inexperienced for the role. The new role was also a significant upgrade in pay for the other 2. The organization had a rule that you couldn't jump more than 2 pay grades in a single promotion. This was about 6 grades for each of them. I got 1 position, and the other position went to one of the 2 numpties. The one that missed out whinged and bitched to his mate, who was the 2-up manager of the role, about missing out on the pay bump. So the manager created a 3rd position and directly appointed him to it. As soon as we started in the role, it became immediately apparent that they had no idea what they were doing. The role was a software engineer, and neither of them had any experience with the relevant languages or tech stack. To avoid me showing them up, the 2-up manager decided that I was only allowed to do basic support tasks, and they would handle all the development. Since they never actually managed to deliver any working applications, I had nothing to support, so I spent my day watching movies on my laptop. I persisted for about 6 months, and then my wife was offered a promotion that involved moving towns. I quickly found a job in the new town with her organization, and I've been blissfully happy at work for the last 11 years. Story 29. I worked for a shop that offered photography services at a high-end resort. I was asked to design a new sign promoting our family photos, and based on the size of the sign, I was a little bit limited on the photos we could use for it. But I found the perfect one. Good-looking family of 4, beautiful views, and a good fit for the sign dimensions. Sent it in for review to the owners of the company and was asked to replace the photo with a different family. I was very happy with the design and convinced this photo was the best for the sign. When I pressed further, I was told that because the family was Chinese, it would target cheap Chinese tourists who don't want to spend any money. The mother in the photo was literally wearing several pieces of Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry. They're known for making custom pieces for the British royal family. I happen to know that the father in this photo was a doctor, not to mention they were staying at this luxury resort. After pressing back again, pointing out the details in the photo that screamed luxury, the owners insisted and I replaced it with another photo of a white family, which Emo did not offer the same photography quality at all. It was approved immediately, and I put in my notice. The owners had always been awful to work for. The team was fantastic, so I was sad to go. Story 30. My career is hardwood floors. For about a year, I worked for a company that paid my by the square foot. I knew this going into it, so that wasn't a surprise. I was also aware that you only get paid once. If you ever have to go back and fix your work, you're not getting paid. If you're doing anything other than installing floor, you're not getting paid. I accepted these terms. Right off the bat, rates were not as good as advertised, but I was still making all right money, so I stuck it out. Over time, the jobs got worse and worse. Just as a really basic example, if I'm doing a giant house with an open floor plan, I'm going to put in way more floor per day than a little condo. There were a lot more condo-type jobs, shrinking my paychecks. I was very quickly getting to the point where I could make more money elsewhere. One day my boss texted me to pack up where I was and go to a job I was at last week to do a repair. All right, that's how she goes sometimes. I get my van all packed up, not getting paid, and when I get there, the client isn't home. I text my boss. He tells me to just go back to the original job. That was the last straw. That was 2 hours I wasn't getting paid through no fault of my own. I texted him my 2-week notice. Story 31. A pay raise that was promised wasn't received after a promotion. I went to talk to my boss, but instead of correcting, he told me that I was looking for a handout and questioned if I even really wanted the job. He then told me that my position barely existed before I was put up, and that he'd expected me to carry on the duties of my past role on top of my new one and show that I was competent, before one day getting the raise that was promised to me before I accepted the promotion. If that's not enough, he told me that he was essentially talking to my coworkers behind my back and that they agreed with him and I was greedy, lazy, and again looking for handouts. My day started at 5 a.m. My commute was an hour and a half. I was working from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and was barely briefed on my new position, but I was still busting my ass to the point of a burnout. So I said enough was enough, gathered my things, and left immediately. Later, I sent him a scathing text calling him a pompous, disrespectful ass, and then blocked his phone number. A few months after that, some old work colleagues visited me out of the blue and told me that if I ever needed anything, they had my back and that they didn't know how poorly I was treated until it happened to them. Dude was such a jack-off, story 32. Does part-time during school count? When I was in school, I used to have some Saturday part-time jobs because I simply wanted more money without asking my family for it. The horror job that topped everything was at a very fancy, or so they wanted to appear, French-style patisserie. The owner was a stupid, disrespectful hag who lacked good manners and I think overall sanity. This woman was not able to speak like a normal person, but screamed and screeched without an end. She yelled at me constantly, was absolutely disgusting and disrespectful towards me, belittled me in front of her customers, repeatedly told me I'm not a fit for gastronomy. I only laughed because I was getting my education with my 6 languages and now I'm working in the legal field. Yeah, take that, you cake hag. She was mostly keeping me there overtime to clean at the end of the day and was demanding that I still work whole Saturdays when I was shortly before my final exams. I obviously needed the extra time to study, but she didn't care. The final straw for me was when she wrote me a very belittling and disrespectful email insulting my intelligence. I just never showed up again and only demanded a written confirmation from her that I quit. On rare occasions, I still walk past her stupid patisserie and hope she chokes on her wannabe French cakes that are flavorless and taste like pure sugar. Story 33. 6 fucking years in a row, I was told. Do these things, work hard, get that big GS13 promotion. Every time I did the things, I worked hard, and I got denied every time for totally bullshit reasons. They'd give me a new list and send me back to work. One year, I swear they told me that I didn't volunteer for enough bullshit committees and things. Then when I volunteered for stuff, they told me no. Partway through it, I had escaped that particular manager and was quietly working in a satellite office, still being denied my promotions by the home office asshole, but not having to deal with him anymore. So I was remotely content. Then asshole manager pulled his asshole weight and pulled me out of the happy office I worked in and tried to place me not only back under his direct management, but onto a mandatory night shift position, which leads me to the final straw. I was a single dad with a 1-year-old baby, and he told me to figure it out when I told him there was absolutely no way I would be able to work the night shift in my situation. Well, I figured it out. I didn't even give 2 weeks, days, or hours notice. I handed my badge to security at the end of the day and fucking left after just shy of 10 years. Story 34. When I realized my opinion on any topic would be overlooked, even if I'm the biggest expert in the room. My old boss had the nasty habit of thinking he's the one who knows. Like I'm a programmer with 10 years experience, and the most he did at programming was a 2-3 week boot camp. But I thought he considered my opinion, even if grading, as equals. One day I got the example that anything that comes out of my mouth has no value to him. So basically, when COVID started to be less of an issue, we restarted going to the office once a month. Me being on his way to the office, we decided to have him pick me up on the way, save on fuel. Sure. On the way back, I see his GPS is stupid and just told him, cut through this parking lot and boom, you will be at my home. There is absolutely no way he knows more than me. That's my neighborhood, and he lives half an hour further. But he brushes me off and decides to follow his GPS. That sends us 2 lights further than it even should before turning around at my home. That's when I decided I need to change jobs. Story 35. Man, I worked as a receptionist for a dermatologist and absolutely loved it and the doctor, but that eventually turned into an office management position. When she decided to open up more locations, she decided to hire her sister to help me. Spoiler, didn't need the help, nor did she help. Day 1 of her starting, I got constant emails of what I was doing wrong, even though that had never been expressed to me over the years I worked there by anyone else or the doctor themselves. Constantly passive-aggressive, or just mean girl energy, like purposely leaving me out of coffee runs with the nurses or things like that. I would try and go to the doctor about it, but she would get defensive because, duh, it's her sister. Final straw, and the day I quit and didn't work at 2 weeks was when I got an email saying that she couldn't continue to do my job for me, and if we needed to find someone who could do the job, she would. Mind you, I technically did 3 people's job wrapped up into the title of office manager with little pay to show for it. From what I've heard, it's a complete mess at that office now. Treat good employees good is my motto. Story 36. When my manager told me exactly what lie I was going to tell the client. Working in banking software. Our software had some limitations and didn't work directly with some banking systems. I had developed a workaround that other clients were happy with after seeing it in action. My manager did not like the workaround or having to disclose that this was all a real thing. A client that was not yet set up was going to cancel the contract based on what they had heard about this. Manager tells me I'm going into that phone call, telling them there were no issues with anything and that we don't have to modify anything to get it to work on their systems. Basically, a stream of lies. When the call started, they listed off all the known issues. Manager retorted with statements that they were wrong and had bad info. When I was asked by the client, I told them straight up that the issues were true, but I had done all these things to fix them, and we had 6 to 8 current clients happy with the solution. If looks could kill, the client was happy with my response. I got them up and running good in the usual 30 days, but that was the day I decided I'm done with this company. Story 37. A long time ago, like in the 90s long ago, I worked at Pizza Hut. It was my first job. I part-timed in school and then went full-time once I finished high school. I used to do the day prep shift, so I was first in the morning and I'd make all the dough for the pizzas for that day. Anywho, about a year or so into being full-time, I was waiting for the first batch to finish mixing. This is probably 7:30-ish in the morning. And I thought to myself, this is my life. This is gonna be my life. I need to do something about it, or I am gonna be stuck here forever. That thought on its own was enough to scare me into going back inside, writing out a resignation letter, pack up my shit, and go home. Dough still mixing and all. I feel bad that I left quite a messy situation for the store manager that was on shift that day. The dough would have started expanding in the mixing bowl once it finished mixing, and would have expanded enough that it would have overflowed the mixing bowl. But I knew that if I didn't leave right then and there, that I would probably have stayed there for years. Story 38. They cut my pay from $28 hour to $7 hour. I was running the lab for the biology department at a top university. They hired someone to be my supervisor for $40 hour, but she was less qualified. And they expected me to stick around and train her, then go back to pay rate for new hires while still doing my job, plus a lot of hers. I also made a ton of money for the department by setting up a jellyfish breeding program so we could trade them to other institutions for whatever we wanted, like microscopes. Creating a surplus of money we had to scramble to spend, but couldn't be allocated for wages, apparently. The professors whose labs I managed literally begged the administration to give me the supervisor job I was already doing, and I was even interviewed. But apparently the lady who got the job was the niece of the dean, who put pressure on hiring her and increasing pay for that position. I did stick around to train her, then quit as soon as my pay would have dropped. From what I heard in the first week, she accidentally killed all the animals, couldn't do anything, and quit after a few months by not showing up to work at all without telling anyone. Story 39. Worked at a used car lot for a while in the shop. The owner would have us work on various projects on the property from time to time, no big deal. I even installed some CCTV cameras at 2 of his other lots, as I had experience and used to install satellite TV. Then in the middle of July, while we were under heat advisory, he had me go to the smaller lot as he had purchased the house and lot next to it, demolished the house to expand the lot, to have me pick up all the small debris, while another guy ran the skid steer, loading a trailer that I would then drive out and empty. I had already been applying at a John Deere dealer and got the call. They needed me to go for my urinalysis. I knew I was hired. Took my UA on Thursday, and then bright and early Friday morning, I backed up to the rear bay door and was loading my tools when he walked into the shop. For a guy that had to have 10-minute-long interrogations about every little thing, it was a beautiful 4-word exchange. Esuranme, you done? Reply, yes, sir. That place was stealing my soul, and I hated it anyway. Story 40. I only switched jobs once in my career and I lost my wife years ago. But before that, she was 3 months pregnant. It was 2 years of IVF, stress, and money. I'm not complaining, it's just what it was. Anyway, she woke up one morning and was very ill. She lost the child in our bathroom. It sucked. It really sucked. I called my boss and let him know I had to take the day off. The next day, I got a lecture about personal time and being a team player. I'm still blown away. I called a neighboring agency that afternoon. Within 10 days, I was given a job offer. Wish I could tell you it was a huge raise. It wasn't. But within 2 years, I took over their department. 2 years later, I came back to my old job as the department director. I'm sorry to tell you that I fired that former boss. And to this day, that's the only retribution and mean-spirited shit I've ever done professionally. It's been 14 or so years now. I'm doing okay. I guess I'm old. Just chilling. Life by myself has been challenging, but I'm doing okay. And I have zero regrets about firing that asshole. Good times. Story 41, they were blowing up my phone while I was on vacation at Disney with something that could have easily waited. I quit within a month of returning from vacation. Story 42, my manager used to be really micromanaging. I mean, asking me every 5 minutes, what are you doing now? Who are you checking now? After I was already telling him what I had to do or doing what he owed me, etc. One day I was really fed up with this. As I had a call from the doctors, I had a blood test done and I went out to take the call. Max, 5 minutes. It lasted. When I came back, he had a shitty attitude and said, I've been in your seat, I know what you do, shouldn't take that long, bullshit. Told him it was a call from the doctor and he said, work is work. The man who was speaking on the phone about football for at least in 1 H a day. Didn't say anything, applied and found a job with better pay and benefits within a few weeks and gave my resignation and that's it. He was very surprised and wanted to do a counteroffer. Told him he knows how to do my job, so do it himself. New guy that was hired as my replacement left after 2 weeks. LOL, life is good sometimes. Story 43. I was in high school, 16 years old, and this was supposed to be a part-time summer job for a farmer, but morphed into full-time plus and was affecting my school life. One day, my boss decides he is going to put in a new swing set for his kids in his backyard with these huge posts he wants to concrete in. He sends me to go get 2 bags of, his exact words, concrete. I double-check because I'm sure he meant cement to mix with gravel and sand to make concrete, but no, he doubles down again and says he wants 2 bags of concrete mix. Okay, I get exactly what he asked for. Upon returning, he immediately starts absolutely ripping into me and cussing and calling me an idiot and just won't stop. Reflecting on it, 25 years later, he may have had an alcohol or substance use issue. Next day, I quit right before harvest season started. Asshole had his wife try calling me several times asking me to come back, even on a temporary status as they were so short for help. No one wanted to work for him due to his reputation, it turned out. Story 44. Heinous Republican conservative pick-me-pitch took over my department and targeted me because I'm liberal and queer. I talked back a lot and she labeled it as inappropriate. I was also on FMLA. She tried to corner me and intimidate me and I replied to her hard pass. Next thing I knew, they were escorting me out of the building. Doesn't help that I sent a text to the group chat calling her out publicly for the reprisal of being on FMLA, which was just convenient for her to harass me and target me, by insisting I use a broken chair that someone had already fallen out of, so she wanted to shut me up fast and I got paid for the rest of the week. By the time I got home, I already had all the screenshots and photos and texts for all the BS I had to endure and sent a carpet email bomb to corporate and complaints to the EOC and the Wage and Labor Board of the state. Now she's targeted a friend of mine, just from association. So it's just a toxic, hostile work environment because she's bigoted. Story 45. I was working on a TV show where I did makeup on the female host. She was a bit crazy and ended up getting fired. During her time as the host, I did makeup on a regular guest for all of her appearances. That regular guest ended up becoming the new female host after the first one was let go. When she came in, she said out loud in the makeup room, I don't want anything that had. Well, that included me, even though I had been doing her makeup every time she was on the show before the switch. Soon enough, all the other regulars followed suit. I found myself running out of phone battery by the time lunch came around because no one would sit in my chair. So I went to the department head and told her, it's clear that I'm unwanted here, so I think it's time I leave. Put in my 2 weeks notice and never looked back. It was a fun show and where I met my husband and made many great friends, but man, what a blow to have people hate you because you're associated with someone they don't like. Story 46. We had internal employee satisfaction surveys and our department consistently ranked amongst the highest in the company. New director comes in and absolutely destroys morale, and our next survey reflects that. He has a shit fit and blames his managers. He believed that nothing would ever stick to him because he was such a greasy little shit. But we stuck that to him. I left shortly thereafter. On my last day, he comes ripping into the office at 10 after 5, and I've tidied everything up and am about to walk out the door. He tells me to hold on as he has to conduct my exit interview. It lasts about 10 minutes before devolving into an expletive-filled screaming match. It was awesome. Story 47. Made a mistake that was easy to fix. Coworker of mine reported this to the duty manager, who then publicly humiliated me in front of all my colleagues, and then had the nerve to say that I would fail my university studies the way I was approaching my job. Man, I was pissed at the way the whole thing was handled, and I was very close to handing in my apron and saying, I quit. Even now, nearly a decade later, it makes me angry thinking how I was treated. I never went back to that place after that shift. There were a lot of things fucked up about that place, but that incident sealed it for me. Fortunately, it was only meant to be a temporary gig anyway, and I returned back to university just a few days later. If I have a bad day at my current job, I always think, at least my current working environment is so much better. Story 48. I'm a French-trained chef with a degree in restaurant management who's been cooking for 16 years now. I had a shift lead who was notorious for undercooked everything and sending out raw beef and chicken. Tell me, just shut up and do what I tell you, or I'm lost due. I looked him dead in the eyes, took off my apron, told him I quit, and went home. Motherfucker made people sick with his food, and he tried to tell me that the chili was still fine after being out of temp for an hour. Story 49. Target Canada Starbucks. Wasted 6 weeks of trying, learn everything and help as much as I could. The last day of training, I got hauled up into the office by the Dept MGR, an assistant MGR, and for a good 10 minutes just gripe about all the flaws I had. Most of it had to do with my face, and then told me I'm horrible at customer service. I have a good case of resting face, and like most neurodivergent, I can mask it unless I need to really concentrate. The customer service part? The store isn't even open to the public, and the customer service was all roleplay. And I told them right at hiring, I am absolutely at role-playing. Anyways, they made me feel like I was back in grade 9 again, and I was a weepy, snotty mess. Clocked out, husband took one look at me when he came to pick me up and said, I'm not going back and we'll make do. Blocked their numbers, never looked back. Story 50. When my boss went on vacation, we had to pick up some slack while she was gone, and it was really difficult for me and my coworkers. We made it through the week and were all really proud of our performance, and got most everything done that we usually did with a few exceptions. But when she came back, she said that in a meeting it was brought up by someone that we didn't work hard enough while she was gone, and basically implied that we had been slacking because she wasn't there to moderate us. It was devastating, and we were all upset because we had worked so hard and got so much done despite the extra workload. To top it off, one of my coworkers from a different department said that no one in the meeting actually said that about us. It was just my boss who was saying it. That coworker actually encouraged me to leave once I told her I was looking for another job and said she didn't blame me. A year later, I found out my boss got fired not long after I left. Story 51. I had a manager once who would agree to things but never wanted it in writing. He just shrugged it off as he's an informal guy. Like, sure, Dagoba, you can leave early on Tuesdays and finish your shift from home, so your wife can go to work and you can be home for the bus. Hunky-dory, until he decided it wasn't and threw me under the bus for working an arrangement he never agreed to. I learned a lot about CIA from working for that douchebag. Story 52. My mother died. They refused to give me time off BC. My mother wasn't having a service. I provided the obituary and gave them the name of the contact at the funeral home. I just couldn't with them anymore. Story 53. 3 stories, 3 times managers decided to FAFO. Story 1. I used to work at a bar as a dishwasher, and I was worked doubles for 3 weeks straight, and when we finally get another dishwasher, I'm expected to train him, etc. So, after busting my ass with 3 weeks of doubles 5 days a week, I asked for a raise and told I wasn't worth more than a 10-cent raise. So 2 days passed and I set up an interview for another spot. Got hired fairly easy and I was hired $2 more. Then I made it the shop, told old boy to F off, and I'm done. The other guy quit 4 days later, and they tried to work him like me when I did doubles for 3 weeks. They were left without a dishwasher for 1 day before they called me back and offered me 50 cents more to come back. I just laughed and told them you, FAFO. If you want the other stories, Lemon's Story 4. New AGM yelled at me for doing something I shouldn't have, which, yes, I did, but it was a real dumb, arbitrary rule, and the bussers were like usual, nowhere to be found. Come back to the kitchen performing the same exact task that he yelled at me for 30 seconds prior. So he could not only yell at me in front of guests, unprofessional, but in front of the entire staff as well. He was a real big asshole and had a hard-on for me since the day he started at that location. He found a reason to yell at me for even things I had nothing to do with constantly on every single shift I worked. At the end of the shift, he got all cheery and buddy-buddy with me. Don't forget the next 2 weeks starting tomorrow are the busiest days of the year. Be here a little early. I laughed. I walked up the stairs, business was in a basement, called my GM and left a VM that I was done and that Andy could suck my They were perm closed 4 months later. Story 55. Was working at Toys R Us for a year and was thinking about quitting because the store manager did not like that I was requesting hours off to go to college. And because of that, he would fluctuate my hours on purpose, making me work less. Hours at the beginning of the semester, and ungodly hours at the end of the semester during finals, when I had said, I want the opposite multiple times. The final straw was him bringing in the regional manager, claiming I was stealing to have a meeting with me. I asked for proof after he tried to bully me to confess, and then proceeded to tell the regional manager all of his behaviors before quitting on the spot. I then went home to do finals, got my associate's degree, and moved to a better university on a bunch of scholarships. Now, Toys R Us is out of business, and I'm working in an office while that old manager is working in the cafe at my job. Story 56. For one job, being scolded by my boss, who informed me that a coworker said I was unprofessional for wearing jeans and a company shirt to a work event when others were dressed similarly. I wasn't informed of any dress code for the event, nor was there anything that I was wearing that was against the company dress code either. Also, this wasn't the first time this particular coworker ran to our boss to try and get me in trouble for something stupid that they didn't bother talking about to me first. Toxic environment. For another job, hearing our contract for the specific department I worked in wasn't going to be renewed, resulting in all of us watching coworkers get fired by an alarming amount if they made the simplest mistake. Went and got a different job that I've been at now for 9 years and counting. I wasn't going to give that company the satisfaction of firing me, nor was I going to beg them to transfer me to a different department. I went out on my own terms. Story 57. My supervisor would show up late or simply not show up at all and would never tell me. Yes, he was my supervisor, but our department was 3 people, myself, supervisor, manager. I never covered for him or anything, just simply said, I don't know, when asked where he was. Anyway, that supervisor never did his job, then had the nerve to make me do my job and his, and said I was hard to get in contact with. I had desks in 3 separate areas of the building, under his orders. I finally decided I can't possibly live up to the expectations this guy wanted, and I told him to go talk to HR about getting me fired, as he had threatened to do previous times. By the end of the day, they hadn't made a decision on my being fired, so I quit. The last thing I wanted was to drive all the way back to work on a Friday morning, just to be told to go home, so I beat them to the punch. Story 58. Haven't quit yet, but I recently had my final straw moment. My manager, who knows about my hobbies and that I do said hobbies to deal with the stress of work, indicated I'm spending too much time doing what I enjoy and that I'm not spending enough of my energy at work. To clarify, my job consumes most of my energy and leaves me mentally and emotionally exhausted at the end of the day. I do physical activities after work, during my evenings and weekends, to cope and reduce my stress levels. It has never once interfered with my job aside from making it easier to deal with. This comment comes after I performed well during one of the hardest years of my life because I had an outlet. I'm done. Already sending out resumes. Story 59. This is going back years to the 90s. I was working at a local ice rink, which I absolutely loved. My job flopped between an arcade attendant, skate guard, and supervisor, essentially watching over the kids in a play area. I was at the job for about 4 years at this point. My manager at the time asked me to help them disassemble one of the 2 big attractions in the rink. It was fun, easy at first, but eventually turned into a lift hundreds of pounds of steel and get them into the waste. I started to realize the job was more for construction or deconstruction and not the jobs I was hired for. For $12 an hour wasn't happening, nor did I want to do this, nor could I handle that heavy lifting. I gave my 2 weeks notice, telling them I was moving on and will be getting an office job, which did through a temp agency. Office job, while only lasting 2 years, ending up being one of my most favorite jobs. Story 60. Back in 2021, I used to work at a treatment center. I was responsible for their digital marketing. Imagine being a digital marketer and not being allowed to put content calendars in orders. Just CZ Doctor of specific service felt she wasn't viewed enough despite putting all the services on ad the exact amount of days. This leads to constant harassment, name-calling. Management wasn't a help either. They always put the doctor's request as they were the breadwinners. It got toxic to the point that I had to make changes last moments. For so many times it hampered my mental health. Then, within 7 months, on a team meeting, the management called me by a slur that implied I want to put ads or Facebook because that way I want to embezzle money. Imagine my internal facepalm. This happened at a team meeting. All my teammates who were under me were there. I quit right then and there, handed over every single ads I was responsible for with receipts. I still hate that center. Story 61. There was an internal opening for the production manager job after the previous one left, and I'd been working toward that very position for quite some time. I applied and interviewed well, I thought, and instead of 1 person, they hired 2. I trained both of them, and of course got the You're invaluable where you are, but hang tough, as we have plans to add another tier in the hierarchy so that you can feel like you're being promoted, but it's really just an extra rung on the ladder to management. So essentially, they'd be able to pay more with the promotion, but less than if they weren't adding the extra tier. And you'll be doing the same job, but with extra responsibilities that I had already taken on in an attempt to better stand out when it came time for the bigger positions. A couple weeks later, after accepting a new job, I presented them with a "sorry for your loss" greeting card that I used as my 2 weeks notice. Story 62. I got yelled at by my manager and she was telling me people were saying I was toxic, and I asked who. BC, no one had complained about me, BC. This only happened after we got a new department manager and he hated me for some reason. And she was all, "It doesn't matter, no one said that." And the department manager was always mad at me for no reason, like I had literally been working for the company before him and was offered assistant manager before he even existed at our store. I declined BC, I didn't want the responsibility. And anyways, he kept insisting I didn't know what I was doing when I literally had been doing it longer. But anyways, when our store manager was yelling at me that day, I was like, I can't ducking do this anymore, and quit mid-shift and walked out and never went back. Story 63. I was assigned as a scheduler for an engineering job that was already in progress. I contacted the individuals doing the engineering, updated the schedule, sent it to the project leader. I thought everything was fine. Not. I was written up because the client found out we were behind schedule. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to receive the environmental permits. We did not yet submit the required paperwork. They could not be submitted until next week. Drawing needed another week to complete. The owner of my company promised construction could start in 1 week. We were at minimum 5 weeks about, but most likely 7 weeks out. The owner of my company lied to the client. I was blamed. I was not the project leader. I did not send the schedule to the client. I worked as the scheduler on this job for 2 whole days. I did not stay long enough to learn when construction did start. Story 64. Final straw was a combination of 3 things. First off was using my skills misappropriately. One day I was labor, next I was tech support, next I was covering the front. It was an endless cycle. Second was the lying. I was consistently lied to about multiple things, which almost got people seriously hurt. Third and the absolute last straw was the owners not really giving a fuck. They went from caring their first year to going back to substances habits and even going back to alcohol again. I don't know if it was stress, but they seriously didn't care. After working 120 hours and not getting paid for 2 weeks after working as many as 16 hours in a day, I left and was jobless for 6 months. It was the hardest 6 months of my life. Now I work for a company that respects its workers' times, and everyone treats you as a friend. Story 65. I got incredibly sick at work on my 2nd week on the job. The charge nurse disliked me for being a vegetarian and would regularly harass me about it. How are you going to pass the LPN course when it requires you to say that meat is part of a meal? Which is funny, because isn't it supposed to be the other way around? Anyway, I got super sick at work and couldn't leave. She told me to go straight to the emergency room once my double shift ended, which I did, and that she got someone to cover me for the next day's double shifts. I slept in that morning and got a call from my hiring manager asking why I was a no-call/no-show. I promptly quit, and the hiring manager straight up said they would never be able to keep anyone if the LPNs are constantly running us off. Story 66. The only job I walked out from tried during my yearly review to also tack on a write-up for unprofessional appearance, a mohawk that I'd gotten approval for from my supervisor's supervisor, and at the time of the attempted write-up had already been shaved off for over 6 months. And a second unrelated one that my supervisor said was because I called out drunk a few weeks back. I'd woken up to my entire kitchen floor covered in liquid dog shit because my dog got sick while I was asleep and didn't feel it was appropriate to go into that much detail when calling out. I was already splitting my time between 2 locations for this company. So I just got up in the middle of this and told him that I don't work for him anymore, so I don't need to sit and listen to him make up lies about me. Story 67. Worked as a mobile technician working on trucks. We covered breakdowns 1 week in 4, and it was always busy and some nights out late, etc. They implemented a lot of controls on overtime, and how it was booked, claimed it was for welfare. A month or 2 after that, I was made to stay out until around 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, did a pretty much 24 shift while driving in between jobs. Found out the last job was requested for the following Monday, but since I was out, the call handler sent me. On top of that, one of the jobs before that had another engineer around the corner, but again they sent me because I'm the on-call engineer. A couple days into the next week, I get questioned on 90 minutes overtime from the previous month. I was in a new job within 3 weeks. Story 68. I was back at work after spending a week in the hospital with my 2-year-old who had epilepsy. I got permission to keep my phone at my desk in case of an emergency. New manager came by while I was on break, saw my phone sitting on my desk, confiscated it without asking. When I came back and saw it was missing, I went to my manager to figure it out. She decided I wasn't allowed to keep my phone at my desk, that I could keep it at her desk, where no less than 6 phones had been stolen in the previous 6 months. I said no, said I'd put it in my car or my locker. She said no, said she'd give it to me on my lunch. My lunch came. I got my phone, flipped her off, and left and never came back. Story 69 was signed off for 2 weeks after a nervous breakdown. It was caused by various factors, but the bullying culture at my job was a big part of it. The final straw was my boss calling me on the Monday of the second week, not to see how I was, but to tell me to come back as the rest of the team were struggling with my workload. Rest of the team had 4 clients each they dealt with. I had 16. I didn't ask for 4 times the workload of everyone else, but when I asked for some help, I was told no. When I asked for the clients to be shared out a bit, I was told no. I saw them all swanning off early, their work done, whilst I was struggling under mountains of paperwork. We couldn't leave until our work was done. Story 70. A riot broke out in a boarding house I worked in. 2 tribes of indigenous 16 to 7-year-old man-sized boys with weapons. Any object not tied down was a missile. They smashed every window in the place, and it just myself and another female house parent in the middle of it all. I was scared for my life. I had given the head of the boarding school a heads up. It was going to happen because I saw it brewing all day, and they told me it was fine and they'd deal with it all that afternoon. After 7 cop cars broke up the riot brawl, the principal of the school came into the room I was in and basically told me to toughen up. It was all cleaned up by the cleaners, new windows were put in, everyone carried on like it never happened. Story 71. Just got tired of the shit. Worked for a small niche company in a niche market. Myself and my boss were the only 2 people that had worked for another company doing the same thing. We worked there at different times. In theory, I could do anything that needed doing, but he preferred women around him in the office. So I got bumped to part-time work, then de facto placed under a family member of his, who I got along with, actually. I got promised a raise if I stayed, but the raise never materialized and I got even less work. I did a few jobs with him a couple years later. It sucked. A year and a half after that, he asked me to do some more. I said, go for yourself. I loved that work, though. Story 72. When they let go of the cleaning staff and expected us to clean the bathroom, and this was halfway into 2020. It's bad enough to clean a bathroom, but during a pandemic? Fuck that. Story 73. When they wanted me to take on 80% more work for the same pay, and I was the lowest paid at the entire building with 5 floors. Plus, it was night shift, and I was working 15 hours almost every day, and even during weekends. After all this, I asked for a 15% hike in view of the extra work given to me, and the fact that I was the only member in my team. Ignored and told we will think about it. The straw that broke the camel's back was they held a meeting last Friday to announce bonus for the whole office. The catch? New joiners like me who haven't finished a year will not be getting a Heil or bonus this year. Put my resignation an hour after that. Pretty happy with things now. Story 74. Beauty industry. Getting accused by the nail salon owner I worked for at the time of getting my lashes done at the salon's lash artist's house. This was during the 2nd year of COVID, and we were having dinner together, and she saw us at the eatery. She pulled the girl to the side and was speaking in Vietnamese and shooting off as she responded dejected and defensive. The poor girl had COVID, and I had to get my lashes done elsewhere until she was able to do them again, and she got in trouble. The next time I worked, I spoke with the manager, and she absolutely refused to listen to me explain. And I ended up quitting on the spot because I don't like to work for those who call myself or others liars. Story 75. This sounds strange, but just realizing I didn't want to be there. Later found out it was actually just being burnt out. I was a college student working another job at the same time, and I didn't actually need it. There were many things that had happened beforehand, and I knew that I would be handing in my notice at some point. I just wasn't sure when. Wrote up my notice when I got home and handed it in the next day. It seemed to really surprise my boss. Not really sure why it did, because I expressed to them for months that they really needed to replace the coworker that left because I couldn't do 2 people's work in the same amount of time. Story 76. Boss came to my house on a Saturday night to do my performance review. It was actually my parents' house, and he scared the shit out of my dad who pulled a gun on him. I have been using their house for my mailing address, lol. Figured it was a sign when I made an HR complaint and was told I was in the wrong for putting the wrong address on my document. He saw no repercussions, and I left as fast as I could. Story 77. My company decided, without my knowledge, to combine my sick leave and paid leave together, and that resulted in me not being paid for almost 2 months, even though I was working from home while I was bedridden. And they tried to justify it by saying I was out and that the work I did was not in the office and therefore it was defined as sick leave. Also telling me I should count myself lucky that they didn't fire me. I just handed my resignation there and then. I also wanted to point out during my time working from home, they had dumped an insane amount of work into my lap and, looking back on it, essentially threatened me with my job security if I didn't get the work done. Story 78. Boss screamed at me and cussed at me. I emailed him my resignation without a conversation. My guess is he had screamed at a lot of people and got away with it. That entire culture was toxic. The screaming was the last straw after a lot of other issues, including forcing overtime on my team while making them salaried 12-hour days, asking me to keep credit partners out of loop on changes to terms, etc. It all happened at the same time, and I was fortunate to never compromise my values. I walked away from a shiny title and a massive raise. That was 12 years ago. I haven't made that kind of money since that job, but I'm mostly happy and don't work for a-holes. Story 79. They lowered my pay, got rid of bonuses and commissions, removed benefits, said they couldn't afford to pay us because we were too good at selling the product, raised targets to 5x what they were. We were the only department in the company making any profit during lockdowns, forced us to work from home. After saying it wasn't possible to work from home, they actually gave all our commissions to a failing department instead. When they had the balls to organize company-wide meetings to brag about how the company was breaking records for sales and profits, I was done. I couldn't sit and be lied to by the people who were getting rich off my work and then stealing the pay I'd earned to make them richer. Story 80. They garnished my wages for unpaid student loan payments that were not mine without informing me first. The person who owed the money has the same name and lives in the same metro area, but the company didn't bother to verify the DOB or SSN on the garnishment request. The timing couldn't have been worse, as I had just returned from maternity leave. But adding insult to injury is that the day I found out what had happened, I was so upset that I left work early. I was working as a therapist for kids with ASD at the time and didn't feel I could be very therapeutic, but had to take PTO for leaving early. I eventually got my money back, but barely got an apology. Story 81. I was a civilian contractor working quality assurance in a maximum security prison workshop. My boss was bad-mouthing our head office supervisor, making unprovable allegations against her that were improbable for him to know firsthand and were about sex. I had no way to get him fired for that. So I went to the head office one Monday morning before work and tendered my resignation, stating to the head office supervisor only that, no, I did not my boss's job, and believed firmly he was the wrong man for the position he had. Resignation accepted, given a really good reference the next week by mail, and later on learned that my old boss was fired. No references. Story 82. Worked at a smoothie shop owned by an absolute Karen. She rode up on the board one morning after I had closed the night before and said $20 was missing from the till, and that was one of these three people. Then listed my name with the girl that was closing with me and someone else who had worked earlier, straight up accusing us of being thieves so that everyone who worked there could see. Later that day, she came in and said, "Good news, guys. I found the $20 stuck to another bill in the bank bag," as if it was no big f***ing deal. Ended up quitting immediately that day with no notice. Story 83. After 19 years, with the last year doing everything myself, such as unloading trucks, fabricating, welding, assembling, shipping, etc., and never missing an order going out on time, I asked my uncle for a raise and was told no, there's not enough money. Soon after, they hired a kid just out of high school with no experience because he knocked up his girlfriend. One night, I saw the pay stubs and saw the inexperienced kid was being paid as much as I was. Good for him, bad for them. 19 years of experience walked out the door without a 2-week notice. Unrelated to my leaving, but as a testament of how bad management was, the company went out of business a few years ago. Story 84. When it took 4 years to get from 30K to 38K, after 3 promotions up to manager, and still doing the tasks of my 2 previous roles. When I asked to bump me to 40K, they said they couldn't because my boss wasn't making that. What do you mean a supervisor isn't making 40K yet? I had to go. Poverty was catching up. Next job jumped me to 65K with less responsibility and workload. This was right before COVID inflation, so made it out just in time. Job hopping works because I doubled that the next year, still doing the same job with less responsibility. Story 85. I'd made it clear I was leaving some months earlier. They realized they wouldn't be able to replace me, so the manager called me in for a meeting. I listed all the verbal abuse and name-calling I'd copped from him to my face over the last 3 years. I also listed all the other employers and organizations I'd worked with for over 20 years, and how I'd never received anything but praise for my work from anyone else. I didn't ask for an apology, simply said, "All I want is an interesting job and to be treated with respect." His response? "You don't deserve to be treated with respect." As it turned out, they couldn't replace me when I left. Story 86. I feel like they intentionally pushed me into psychosis by talking about my private life in encoded phrases. I broke down sobbing for 2 hours and no one asked what was wrong, only further solidifying in my mind that they were doing it intentionally, and that all my paranoia I thought I had finally sort of processed over the past 5 years was entirely valid. I walked out of there in a suicidal daze and checked into the psych ward a few days later. I'm never going back there, and I still need to drop off my laptop, but I'm gonna find a way to do it when no one is there. I can't even look at their faces again. Story 87. Worked as a contractor and was withheld 3 months worth of invoices. Employee expected me to travel out of my own pocket to meet them and discuss stuff before they decided whether they'll pay those off. One day, I think, fuck it, I don't need them more than they needed me. Quit all work groups and blocked them on my phone. Received an email 1 month later stating they're gonna terminate my contract effective immediately and to return the company's work assets and do an in-person exit interview to understand why I went uncontactable in order to be paid half of what I'm owed and no commission, to show how appreciative of them for my previous contributions to the company. Story 88. I worked at a digital marketing company some time ago, maybe 2 or 3 months. I brought the division back to life and things were happening. The day I found out one of my subordinates was harassed by my boss and the owner of the company, I quit. It was not harassment. She was threatened with police and all kinds of lawsuits for no reason. She, being a young and very talented lady, was almost held at gunpoint. The bossman was a convicted felon for grand larceny in California in the past. Yep, that was the last straw. Story 89, when I got a write-up because the manager decided he wanted to throw me under the bus for his manipulation of our inventory to cover the audit we were about to get. This was a day after I found out my dad had cancer. Threw my badge right in his face and walked out. Story 90. I've quit several jobs. It has always been a stagnant wage and getting turned down for raises. That's been about every 2 years until this current job that's lasted 5, but they just refused to give me a raise for the first time in 5 years. So that might be it for this one. I've gotten a huge pay increase with every new job, 7 jobs in about 15 years. Story 91. This was probably a decade ago when I worked with an architectural design firm. Woke up to about a dozen missed calls and frantic messages from a contractor we were working. Turns out during the early hours of the morning, the construction crew my boss had hired to reno a bar and had neglected to pay for months of work decided to come and literally tear the place apart brick by brick. I don't know the extent of the damage or the blowback, because when I heard that, I wrote an email to my boss and quit within the hour. Definitely wasn't experienced enough or paid enough to deal with that kind of shit. Story 92. They lied to me for 3 years about qualifying for a student loan forgiveness program. Flat out lied. The day they refused to sign the paper they promised they could and would, I applied for the job I'm at now. Story 93. They wouldn't promote me. My boss had quit and I was doing all of the work already, just as I had for the 10 months before they hired the boss that quit. So I got the promotion elsewhere. They had the gall to tell me that I was just about to get the promotion if I was willing to stay. I told them I'd think about it, just to lead them on, but I was out the door. Story 94. It took longer than it should. Damn my trusting nature. I was the 7th person to quit due to the owner's wife. She knew nothing about the business, but made everyone miserable. I went to the business partner and told her I was leaving and why. She asked me to wait while they tried to get more of a buffer in place between her partner's wife and our staff. I tried, but of course it didn't happen. 2 others have left since I have. Now in my 3rd year of the best job I've ever had with great teammates, benefits, and opportunities. So happy. Story 95. Was forced to move. Found out that the state I was moving to, people got paid a kna more and got a hold of the HR document that explicitly said how much. So I had to fight for that raise. Was playing D&D with a guy who just graduated college, working in the same field, and he was making literally double what I was. Found a much better paying job shortly after. Story 96. I was asked to shovel snow all around our building, which is large BTW, when I was the only one in my department, while they have a ton of other people in other departments. I get behind on my work and literally no one could help me catch up while I waste an hour doing that. Story 97. Most 90% of the customers treated me like I was dirt, and I don't say that lightly. I think their attitude to me was racially charged. One day this old man said something very nasty to me that also happened to be an insecurity of mine. I could not and cannot forget it. I wish that it had no power over me, but it does. After he said it, I knew that I could not work in that crappy place ever again because I could feel myself becoming a hateful person. Story 98. As a teen, I worked 7.5 hours at a day home for autistic children in the west side of Vancouver. Staff physically abused the children. I refused to do any of this. When I went home, I told my mom everything and slept for about 14 hours. I didn't even pick up my paycheck. At my mom's insistence, I wrote down everything that I had witnessed, along with the employees' names. The next day, my mom phoned the appropriate authorities. The appalling behavior of the staff and the institution was properly dealt with. Story 99. My boss made us stay until 8 p.m. every night, not even stay and work, just stay to keep her company. We weren't allowed to talk to one another, so we had to just sit there in silence and wait for her to be ready. My mom had been in a car accident earlier that year and almost didn't make it. Plus, she was turning 60, so her birthday was a huge deal. I told my boss this, and I still had to sit there in silence until 8 p.m. I missed my mom's birthday dinner. The next day, I quit Story 100, an absolute piece of shit boss that demanded I give up my 3-day weekend to help a team that didn't plan an implementation and just decided to do it anyway. I asked my boss why he didn't call the actual on-call person, and his response was, "Because I'm calling you." That was the final straw. He got fired 6 months after I left because he got called out on all his lies. In the time he was there, close to 12 people on his teams quit. He went into state politics after that. He should fit in there just fine. Story 101, being moved from a cubicle to a table because I was a contractor and the cubicles were for FTE. During COVID, when most FTE, full-time employees, were working remotely. Story 102, I was a custodian at the high school that I also graduated from. I was in charge of taking care of the swimming locker room, and those kids were assholes all year. One day I went in there and they stuck pencils in the drains and snapped them off, so the entire drain was full of broken pencils. I wrote my boss a note, went home, drove back, dropped off all my uniforms in a garbage bag, and I haven't been back to that hole since. Story 103. I couldn't help fix a lonely old man's internet because I was only the Verizon customer service representative, not their internet service, and I wasn't allowed to transfer them to the internet service provider. I cried when I got off the phone. I walked out soon after, but that was like second to last straw. After that was just someone cussing me out for their bill. But it was the old man's who stuck with me. I literally sighed, put headphones down, grabbed my stuff, and walked out mid-call, while my manager was yelling at me. Story 104. The owner was awful and would just withhold paychecks if she didn't feel like coming in. And then when you finally got your check, at least 50% of them bounced. I would find out standing in the grocery checkout when my card would get declined. It was horrifying. This was in my 20s when I worked paycheck to paycheck, and maybe if they were apologetic or it happened rarely, it'd be one thing, but they just acted like it was normal. I worked there 9 months and at least 8 bi-weekly paychecks bounced. Story 105. After I had to take a month off on FMLA as my doctor was concerned about my health, have several chronic conditions. Came back and I immediately had all promotions, learning opportunities taken away from me. Slapped on the most boring task on the team. My manager stopped talking to me aside from orders. And when I answered an email 5 minutes late due to my APT's management wanted me to move my car during COVID, so remote work, they proceeded to write me up for it. Story 106. When I didn't get a raise, because I had used all 5 of the sick days we were given per year. The CEO said that if you had to use all 5 sick days in a year, you were underperforming. It was a nonprofit, and I was their vocational evaluator. I easily brought in $20K per month in assessments that I billed out to the state. I noped out of that place and got a new job paying a lot more. Story 107. After a 3-month contract, they would make me permanent. But then it turned into another 3 months. We carried on like this for a while. Then one day they decided that they can offer me a job where I need to do about 3 or 4 people's job at once with the same salary I got while working on contract for them. So I said no thank you and left. It was already a situation of overworked and underpaid. That just felt like they are using people do more for less pay. Story 108. I was going out of my way to train everyone and support the manager who lived halfway across the country. Got micromanaged because my sales were slipping. Manager had a new favorite, and I became good friends with him. After 5 months, he told me she was trying to get me fired because I was getting on her nerves. Job paid great for 23-year-old, but it wrecked my car, and the jobs they gave me consistently went further and further. I missed my girlfriend, so I quit with no job lined up. Story 109. First and last day of a forklift job, the owner says speed is key, go as fast as you can. Coworker says it's actually $10.99 and paid via card of some sort. Owner's wife screamed at me to slow down, so I told my coworkers I'm out, just helped them with the bulk of the work, then walked out. Owner proceeded to tell me I'd be arrested if I left. Then started screaming at me that I'd never work again. That guy. And I hope his other employees left soon after. Story 110. Working 6 days a week as a 32-hour-a-week salaried employee. Was asked to fill in for the manager who left with no pay raise. After complaining to highest levels, was told, until I work 120 hours a week, no help would be brought it. That's what it means to be a manager at this large healthcare organization. I had a new job and resigned within a month. Story 111. In a one-to-one after my first month at a job, my feedback was that I sigh too much. That was it. I went back to my desk and looked for a new job immediately. When I was summoned for jury duty, my place of work could decide whether to keep paying my full salary or whether the state should pay me a significantly lower one. They chose the latter. I was already ready to leave, but that was the final nail in the coffin. I resigned 2 weeks later. Story 112. 1. Being treated like by everyone except 2, maybe 3 coworkers. 2. Being paid the same as an assistant daycare teacher when I was a lead. 3. No overtime pay for the 12-hour shifts I worked. 4. Having to come into work while having a fever and vomiting my guts out while some of my coworkers could call off for sniffles. 5. Almost everyone being on their phones during outside play. Not just a quick time check like on their phone the whole time. Story 113. A hand-holding prayer circle. It was the first hour of my first day. I walked out. It was the final straw. The job ad seemed sketchy and nondescript, but I showed up. I needed money. I left after the prayer circle, but it was preceded by finding out it was a door-to-door meat sales from a truck you had to rent. You also had to buy all the meat first. After dropping that information, they wanted to hold hands and pray. I noped out of that place fast. Story 114. My employer, Small Biz, mismanaged things so badly that I took a 10-day trip and came back to discover that the entire company nearly went under while I was gone. There was also a regular situation where the company credit card would keep getting declined, so we'd have to pay suppliers using our personal credit cards and be reimbursed later. It was disappointing because there were promises that my role would evolve into a bigger one in the future, but after that, I knew it was all a lie. Story 115 was a 5th period union carpenter apprentice. The company was mistakenly paying me journeyman wages for several months. When they eventually discovered their mistake and my next paycheck was reduced to my pay grade as an apprentice, I was more than qualified to hold my own on any job site and was giving guidance to some other carpenters that couldn't read a tape or shoot a grade layout column. I quit and immediately went to the union hall and registered myself as a journeyman and never looked back. Story 116. One of the program managers assaulted me and his director tried defending his actions. Dude sucked at his job, made costs to operate in his programs unscalable, higher, and unsustainable. Somehow him assaulting turned into a valuation of my performance, and my director did a poor job of backing me up but rather had the turn the other cheek approach. Quit the following week. Funny thing is, dude completely wrecked everything after I left, and quite like 2 months later, they called frantically asking if I'd come back. Nope. Story 117. I worked at a gas station and someone literally from the entrance of the store all the way to the bathroom and then on the bathroom floor. I was getting paid $10 an hour. I did not get paid enough for that, literally. Story 118. My boss withheld the bonuses for the entire company because a few project managers were behind on their collections. At a meeting with all the project managers, I said that it wasn't fair to punish everyone for the sins of a few. I mean, the rank and file had zero control over billings. He shouted at me, "If the f***ers don't like it, I'll fire them and get new ones." That was the last time he ever shouted at me. I quit the next day. Story 119. When a manager where I worked when I was 20 bullied so many of the staff, 3 of us, got signed off by our doctors with stress. My doctor told me to write out my resignation and post it to them, stating my leave due to stress covers their notice period. I got a friend to hand deliver it and took great satisfaction knowing I'd never have to go back there, and they were screwed.